Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves. In this episode of Careers in Discovery, I'm with Paulo Fontoura, Chief Medical Officer at Xaira Therapeutics. Paulo and I talked about Xaira's bold mission to use AI not just to speed up drug development, but to rethink how we do it entirely, overcoming human limitations in how we explore biology. We also talked about why Paulo left a successful career in big pharma to join one of the most exciting startups around, how he stays optimistic in the face of failure, and what it really takes to build a company that's changing the game. Well, I'm delighted to be here this week on Careers in Discovery with Paulo Fontoura of Xaira Therapeutics. Paulo, welcome to the show.
Very nice to be here, Tom.
Fantastic to have you. And Paulo, I'm really interested to dive into your career. You've seen the biotech industry from lots of different angles, from academia, from big pharma, from hospital setting to now a biotech company, and you've been involved in lots of other things along the way. I'd like to start by talking a bit about Xaira, because of course this is a company that made a huge splash on its launch at the end of last year, and there was lots of announcements about incredible levels of financing, a fascinating idea, a very experienced executive team being put together. Tell us a bit about the AI discovery of medicines and the work that you're trying to do there.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. It's as you say, I've been around for some time and seen many things, and I'm genuinely convinced that we're going through now one of those moments of real transformation, both for the biotech industry, but hopefully more than that, for medicine and healthcare as a whole. And in my mind, I compare it a bit to the revolution that happened with molecular medicine in the 80s and 90s, when up until then, essentially, we were limited in our ability to develop medicines by our, first of all, understanding of biology, which was not very complete, but also by the ability of truly, manipulating biology at a fundamental level. But with the discovery of genetic, obviously of genes, but also of ways to manipulate genetic expression, to combine genes, to express genes, to construct biologics, for example, all of a sudden a whole new therapeutic space was opened. Right?
Yes.
And I still trained at a time originally where there were very few monoclonal antibodies being developed as therapeutics.
Right.
And then you fast forward 20, 30 years, and all of a sudden it's not only chemicals, small molecules, but we have a variety of different biologics, right? So both monoclonals, but also bispecifics and T-cell engagers, and then gene therapies and RNAi and antisense. So all of a sudden, all that exploded. So from a ability to manipulate biology, we've advanced tremendously. Our understanding of biology hasn't advanced quite at the same pace.
Yes.
Because even though it's become very easy to, let's say, generate large-scale genomic data, functional genomic data, so how our cells transcribe genes into proteins, we can measure that pretty accurately. But the scale of the data is daunting. Right, and the complexity of the systems are still beyond easy understanding, and this is the trend in the whole of science. Up until recently, we were always forced to take a more reductionist approach to science, because it's so complex. There's so many variables. You essentially have to take out as many as possible and have one or two that shift, and you see what that does. Right, so essentially, it's the one gene, one protein, one phenotype approach.
Yes.
Most biology and medicine does not work like that. It's the contribution of multiple genes, multiple proteins, multiple systems, but it's just too complex to model. And this is where I think AI comes in, really.
Yes.
So AI, because of it, essentially, and now these next generation generative transformer models that can take essentially like all sorts of data, multimodal data, large scale data, and really interrogate it and learn the hidden rules, if you want. I think this will propel us to the next stage, if you want. And that is what Xaira is attempting to do. So on one hand, is taking those generative AI models to essentially interrogate cells and understand the hidden rules of biology and discover new targets if you want.
Yes.
It's also to do that, to look at the right patients and try to match the right patients with the right drugs, something that we've been trying to do for decades, not very successfully. And the third one, which is really kind of the catalyst for the company, if you want, was really the Nobel Prize winning discoveries around protein structure. Right. So both the work at AlphaFold as well as the work from David Baker's lab that essentially allows us now to look at protein structure in a much more elegant and efficient way. So we can model proteins in silico, what their structure looks like, but also design drugs based on those insights, right? And this is why Xaira and a few other companies are coming into the fore now, and why, again, I'm very hopeful by combining these things, we're going to be able to discover new targets through AI, design new drugs through AI, and discover the right patients through AI, essentially making the whole R&D process much more efficient.
Yeah, I see. And it's a really interesting point. I mean, of course, there's lots of discussion around AI at the moment, and, sure, optimistic and pessimistic views of the future and all that kind of thing. We're not going to get into that. But essentially, the way you were talking about it there, we had exceeded, with our technical ability, we'd exceeded almost our cognitive capacity to use the data that we were generating. But then this is almost like adding RAM to your computer, right? It's sort of adding that platform to expand our cognitive ability to actually use this data to gain that real insight.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually a really good way to look at AI. I mean, there's obviously, like any new technology, a lot of hype and a lot of misunderstandings and fears, etc. I think one good way to look at AI, especially this generation of AI agents, if you want, is as cognitive assistants.
Yes.
If you want. We know what we're good at as humans. And we still, obviously, whatever we do has to make sense to us humans. So we're not talking about a future in which our lives are dictated by AI in drug development or in medicine. I think we're talking about a future, and that excites me, in which our ability to help others live better lives is no longer so limited by our own cognitive ability, right? And this is something, if you want, we've been doing on and off, or I think we've been doing consistently throughout our evolution, which is finding ways to expand our own limited abilities, right? Whether that was through writing and language, or then when we first started having scientific methods and mathematics and all that. And then it became, the IT revolution also helped, right? Our ability to compute things. Yeah. I mean, computers, actually, the term originally refers to people who did mathematical calculation, not to machines. Until we figured that actually machines do this much better than we do, with much fewer errors. This is kind of the same thing. It's just another whole level. I think, honestly, and that's the hope for everybody, right? If things go the way they should and go well, in a few years, we'll be looking at these as, essentially cognitive assistants, right? Things that help us be more productive and derive more insights.
Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting sort of snapshot of the history of this progress, because, and this isn't what this conversation is about, but it's just an interesting aside. There was always going to be a biological limit to how much we could compute, right? So essentially, I guess what we're doing now is going, okay, well, let's just put the biology to one side and just put this bit over here, and then we can continue to expand.
I think, and I think it is important that we stay involved with it, because like any technology, it will evolve naturally. I mean, the genie's out of the bottle, basically. So the best we can do now in healthcare and in medicine and in drug development is that we have to shape the process as much as possible. We have to be a part of it to make sure that it is being used well and for good purposes. And the humans are still we still need to make it human-centric. Whatever comes out at the end needs to be in the service of humanity, basically. So we need to engage, and that's why I joined Xaira as well, because I am excited about it and I want to be a part of that process, that revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the application of this technology in drug development, of course, we've seen a lot of progress over the last few years. Particularly, we have phase 2 studies currently that are running with AI generated drugs, and there's growing acceptance of kind of the at least the potential of this technology if we don't have something tangible just yet. What's your view on kind of where we are in the acceptance of AI in this field? And I guess that is differences in terms of people's acceptance, regulators' acceptance, patients' acceptance. There's sort of different factors to take into account there.
Yeah, maybe I want to separate that into two broad fields, if you want. The whole field of discovering new biology, discovering new targets, designing new molecules, etc., is something that I think will be judged, if you want, by the results. A drug generated by AI or a drug generated more traditionally, if you want, at the end will still be judged by how good they are. Are they providing good benefits? Do they have risks? What's the data, et cetera, et cetera. So what I think the big difference is that through AI, I think we can not only accelerate the process and make it much more efficient, but we can also discover things that we couldn't up until now, right? So we are expanding the target space and the biology space and making it more capable of finding the right pieces of the biology to go after, right? But again, once the drugs exist, they will be judged by their results like any other drug. Okay, and that's the second part of the answer. How are we? What's let's say the impact of AI in how drugs are then developed once they exist? How are they developed and looked at by regulators, by payers, by healthcare systems, patients, etc.? Well, there's another big revolution happening there because there's a lot of opportunity for, on one hand, efficiency gains. A lot of the time that's spent and the money that's spent in drug development is, and we've been trying to find ways around it, but not very successful, is essentially poor functioning, if you want, lack of efficiency, driven to some extent, again, by our cognitive limitations, right? So you submit, I mean, one of the drugs I worked on, we submitted a file for FDA review that on paper, if you printed it out and you put sheet by sheet one to the other, extended from one coast of the US to the other coast of the US. So it was a massive amount of data. And you can imagine now there's people on the other side who have to read all of that and make sense of all of that and review it with careful eyes, etc. So, it's just slow. And a lot of this obviously can be automated. Right. And so there's a lot of efficiency there. A lot of the recruitment of patients for clinical trials is still dependent upon very mundane processes like calling up clinical sites and finding out, do you have patients that might want to enroll here? And how do you reach them? So it's very cumbersome, right? Again, a lot of room for efficiency improvements there. So I think all of that will change. I think what's important is that transparency is maintained at all stages, right? And that's a bit where the dialogue between the regulators and industry and healthcare systems need to be there, which is we will get to the answers hopefully faster and cheaper, but we need to understand how we got to the answers. And so the ability for anyone to audit and interrogate and find out how things were done still needs to be there. My experience so far has been that, for example, the FDA has become very open about these things because they recognize the need for these things. And actually, they're putting out guidance as we speak around how are they going to accelerate reviews. For example, I think there was even a post 2 or 3 days ago about how they're starting to use, again, AI agents to automate reviews and to do all those things. So I think they're embracing the technology as well. That's a good sign. That's a good sign.
Yeah. Absolutely. We'll come back to this, Paulo, I'm sure, but I'd like to talk about your career for a little while and your journey to this point. So take us all the way back. So you're a medic and a scientist. You trained originally as a doctor, a medical doctor. Tell us a bit about, I guess, the origins of this. Why medicine? Why science? Why drug development? Why this career path for you, do you think?
Well, it's always easy when you look back and you try to draw a line.
Yes.
I think in reality, it's a lot more serendipitous than people really realize.
Sure.
I don't think at least I didn't for sure plan my career to be where I am now. Right. If you want, the common thread is that I've always been interested in science.
Yes.
Generally, even as a young boy, and I've always been interested in the humanities and medicine generally, right? And it seemed kind of like the nice interface between science and humanities is medicine. You know, you want the art of medicine more than the science only. So that was there from the beginning. And then so going into medical school seemed like a natural way to engage in science, but at the same time keep a very human-centric approach to things. Yes. Yeah, and I loved it. I have to say, it is really one of the most fulfilling experiences that one can have is serving others in that capacity. It's truly a privilege. But it's and that I think is true in Europe in several places. It's hard to combine medical practice with scientific research,
yes,
because of the time commitment. Medical practice is truly an all-encompassing endeavor. You're literally 24 hours a day thinking about it, and so it's hard to combine both. I think the US does a better job than Europe does in doing that, allowing careers for physician scientists, which is what I wanted to become. So then, in the beginning of my career, I was trying to do that, combining both. So having like an academic role that allowed me to have a lab and to have a few students, but mostly I was jumping chairs all the time. I was trying to make ends meet all the time. It was very, very hard to do that. Things took a real change as well. The industry bit, if you want, came in when I did my postdoc at Stanford University. Which, as you know, as most people know, it is really still at the center of the biotechnology industry in the Bay Area. A lot of companies have come out of Stanford research, even back to the 70s and 80s. Genentech, obviously, huge influence in the Bay Area, and spending a few years there doing research and seeing colleagues of mine with similar backgrounds, then leaving the lab I was in and going to create companies on their own,
right,
with discoveries they had made in the lab together with me. Yes, was really impactful to see. Oh, that's possible as well. So that's another thing you can do with this type of interest and background and training. So that kind of triggered the interest. And so after returning to Europe, I spent a few years in academic medicine and consulting with biotechs, getting a feel for what is it that you do there and don't do there, etc. And this kind of led to, naturally, again, it's serendipity, to being invited. Oh, would you like to consider this role, that role? And then Roche approached me in 2008. And that was the big change, because that meant giving up the academic career and the medical career and going wholeheartedly into the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. Was that a difficult decision? You talked about sort of wanting to balance the two, focusing on the one and going into industry. Was that a challenging move for you?
It is. Yeah, it is. I think I don't know. I guess each one of us has their own ways of looking at this. It is, because if you like what you do, it's hard to give it up.
Yes.
Right? And I really, really liked what I did. I loved doing medical practice and teaching and having a lab. And so abandoning all that was not trivial, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, the whole leaving where you live and moving your whole family to a new country and adapting and all that, in retrospect, was definitely the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Because change is good for you and you learn new things and you push yourself further, but it's never easy. I mean, it's people, I don't know. I don't want to be judgmental, but people who say it's easy are I don't know. I don't know who they are, but it was certainly not easy for me.
What do you think it was that made that decision for you? Why take that step? And I guess, you mentioned you had a family as well at the time, and you're moving from, listen, Switzerland is beautiful, but it's different to California. Tell me a bit about sort of what pushed
I
that?
mean, it's always the way I think about it. There's always a push and a pull, right? There are things you're probably not so happy with, and things that
Right.
you're really excited about, right? Because otherwise, for me at least, it doesn't click. If it's only a pull and you're super happy where you are, people don't
Yes.
move, right?
Yes.
At least I don't. We like our habits.
Yeah.
And the other way around, if you're not really happy, but there's no pull anywhere, you're going to find something. You're
Yes.
not going to stay put for long. So again, it's a mix of both. I guess on one hand, I always wanted to understand how one could have more impact in a larger scale in healthcare.
Yes.
And as a physician, you treat, I don't know, hundreds of patients every year, right? And so you touch the lives of hundreds of people every year. Mm-hmm. But then if you, let's say, discover a new drug and develop a new drug, you can touch the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in 1 year. So the scale is very different, right? So the ability to say that's I did that, I contributed that to healthcare is very attractive, right?
Yes.
If you, even as a physician, right? I think you need to have that desire to do science on that scale. Mm-hmm. If you don't, it doesn't really work. Then part of it, I think, is do you like teamwork, right? Do you like collaborative teamwork or not? The myth of the lone scientist is very much a myth nowadays, mm-hmm. but there's still a bit of that, right? Academic research, it's still a bit within your own lab with your own team, so you're not really forced into the big world. In the pharmaceutical industry and in healthcare, it is about the big world, right? You engage with everyone around the world. And then another thing which really attracted me was that the opportunity just to learn new things. Mm-hmm. So it is very easy as an academic, a medic, or a practicing physician to spend your life surrounded by people who are really just like you.
Yes,
they've had the same training, they have the same views of the world, right? They share the same burdens every day, so it's very easy to stay in that little bubble. And then I moved to a global company where I was sitting in rooms with people that have completely different backgrounds, not just culturally, from different countries, etc., but also like people who know business and people who know chemistry and people who know market access and people who know basic biology. And the richness in that environment really allows you to flourish and to learn so many new things. So I guess I was looking for something like that as well.
Yeah. And it seems like you certainly found a home there. You were there for 16 years and did different things within that. And I suppose one of the things that struck me looking at your time there is that, and I think this had probably always been the case because your background prior to that was primarily in neurology, which is of course complex. You seem to be attracted to the complicated things, neurology, immunology, ophthalmology, rare diseases, these sorts of things.
Yes, I like complexity. I think that's true. I think that's fair. As a physician, I trained, as you say, as a neurologist.
Yes.
And then I specialized in multiple sclerosis, or neuroimmunology. So the blurring between the two systems. It is. I mean, it's a fascinating field of practice and of study.
Yes.
Also because, quite frankly, our brains are what makes us who we are. Right. So if you really, again, look at it from a human perspective, a human-centric perspective, understanding why when you get Alzheimer's, why'd you lose your memories and what that does to you and how can you prevent that? I mean, it's I think there's a really admirable mission about it that I think attracts a certain type of people to the neurosciences. You're right. Mostly we are people who love complexity, love complex problems to solve. You also need, in all fairness, to have a very high resilience to failure because unfortunately it is an area that's incredibly hard to make progress in.
Yes.
I've been fortunate to have successfully developed a few medicines in neuroscience, but again, there's such an unmet need and we're not making progress fast enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I guess there's several challenging factors, right? Blood-brain barrier being a key one, but then understanding of what actually happens in the brain. How do we actually understand a live brain versus a dead brain and these sorts of things? These are all kind of unique challenges to that part of the body, right?
And our brain is not only the most complex organs in our body, right? And that we don't really fully understand how it works, but it's also an organ that changes dramatically through our lifetimes.
Right.
The brain of a newborn baby changes almost irrecognizably to the brain of an adult.
Yes.
Not just in what it does, but what cells it has and how it's structured and which circuits are active or not, right? So the amount of remodeling that happens throughout childhood and adolescence into adulthood is radical, really. It's one, I don't really know of any other organ that changes so much in our lifetimes. And then when you look at the other end of the life spectrum towards aging, etc., again, it's an organ that changes very significantly, right? And throughout all of that life arc, if you want, it is essentially dealing with all of the external world, right? So if you think about it, most of our organs, if you want, essentially make the body run, right? But they are influenced by external factors, right? The food you eat and the liquids you drink and the sun and the radiation, all that. Yeah, so our skin changes a bit and our liver changes a bit and our intestines change a bit. Our brain has to deal with this sensory 24 hours a day impact of light and sound and taste and smell and hearing. And at the same time, it's not just dealing with that, but it's making sense of that, right? Understanding what that is, and then planning how to react to it. Right. And then on top of that, this whole thing that we don't really know how it's generated, that we call self-awareness or sentience, right? Because that's certainly something that distinguishes us from most other people, most other animals with a central nervous system. We actually have the ability to kind of step outside our bodies and look at ourselves and self-reflect. So how does an organ do that? I mean, we don't understand that. Like, we really do not understand that, right? So again, the fascination, I think, has to attract people who love complexity. Because if you don't love complexity, you're not going to enjoy this. You won't find easy answers in this.
No. And with that in mind, a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are at various points in their scientific career, but a lot of them are early in their career. And whichever area of drug development you choose to apply your trade in, there's a high rate of failure, right? And of course, this is one of the things that you guys at Xaira are trying to tackle with your approach that you're taking. As someone who's kind of been drawn to the areas of greater complexity and therefore, I suppose, greater risk of failure, how do you think about that failure rate at this point in your career, and how would you sort of advise people earlier in their career to think about the inevitability of that failure most of the time?
Yeah, I think if you work in science, and that's something that I learned early on in my career. A lot of science is about tolerating failure. Yes. Because most experiments you do simply don't work. You work on them for months, sometimes years, and then the results just don't appear. So the ability to deal with that frustration, right, I think is psychologically very important. Resilience, I think it's the word that people like to use now, but whatever you call it, grit, persistence, resilience. I think as a scientist, you have to embrace that. There's no other way around it. You have to understand this is part of what it is. If you're having a lot of success, it's probably because you're not asking really difficult questions. Right. Right. The difficult questions are difficult. And so you need to embrace that as part of the profession you've chosen. Right. And the sooner you come to grips with that, the better. Now, the trick, I think, a bit is to acknowledge that while maintaining a certain naive optimism about the whole thing. Yes. Which is like, I know most likely this will fail. I'll still give it a try. Yeah. There's a certain romanticism about that. It's like, okay, I'm willing to have my heart broken once again.
It's probably going to fail, but it'd be really cool if it worked.
Exactly. If you need to have a bit that attitude, because otherwise it will grind you down, right? And then drug development, if you want, is the same thing, but the stakes are higher, right? It's just the stakes are higher in the sense that you're spending a lot more resources, a lot more money, a lot more time, and there's much more to be played for, right? If your drug works, then you can think, wow, I've made this amazing contribution to medicine and people are going to have a better life because of me. But at the end of 10 years, which is usually still the time span we're talking about, getting to that close, really close, and then failing, it's heartbreaking. I won't deny that. And I've lived through a number of those with my colleague, and you always grieve. It takes you a few weeks, you grieve for that failure because of everything, right? What you were trying to achieve, how important it was, how many people worked on it, how much time was spent on that, what you could have done instead of that, right? The opportunity cost. So you have to have that mindset, right? That resilience, that naive optimism, and a bit of romanticism, like once more. I want to do once. I'm going to go through it once more.
Yes.
Because otherwise, it's hard. There's no shortcuts here. Now, I hope, because the system is not very sustainable. That's the challenge we're all facing now. The system is just not very sustainable the way it is. I hope that new technologies like AI and new modalities, like new ways to essentially attack those targets, are going to improve the success rate. And I wouldn't underestimate even how important even a very small increase in that success rate would be. The numbers right now, if you're starting something now and you're going into your first human trial, the chances that it will lead to an approved drug is less than 5%.
Yes.
So there's no other profession really that does that, right?
Yes.
Including in technology or in industry. You know, if your new iPhone has a chance of making it into a product of less than 5%, no one would put money in it, right?
Absolutely.
So this is really an exception, that we play for these very low stakes, or very high stakes but very low probabilities.
Chance of success, yeah.
But even changing that 5% to, let's say, 15%, would be huge.
Well,
would be huge, right? So it's not like moving the needle from 5% to 80%. That would be amazing, obviously. But again, given realistic expectations, right? I'm a really big believer in realistic expectations. Given what we're trying to do, which is incredibly hard to understand human biology, it's incredibly hard still to find the right patients. Moving that from 5 to 80% is likely not achievable now.
Yes.
Moving it from 5 to 20, I think that's within our grasp. We can do that.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Because I often think about it even in smaller terms than that. You know, even if you moved from 5 to 7%, that's actually 40% more success. But you think we're able to go? You think there's the possibility we can go much greater than that?
Because I am convinced the biggest reason for failure is still that we're likely not designing studies to look at the right patients for the right drugs.
Yeah.
Especially, and this is, the reason why I think the 20% is possible is because of my experience in rare diseases. Because in rare diseases, you kind of have that sweet spot of most of these conditions are genetically determined.
Yeah.
So the biology is pretty clear, right? And then if you can find the right entry point, right? So the right target and manipulation, you see results very fast.
Yes.
And then when you look at the patients in trials, because again, they all usually have that same mutation, that same genetic background, there's not a lot of heterogeneity in response. So you don't need huge studies. You can do small studies and still see the benefit. So one of the programs I worked on in my former company, we went from entry into human to FDA approval in under 4 years.
Right.
Which is very, very fast. But that's only possible because of all of these ingredients lined up. We know the biology, we know the target, we can manipulate it, we know which patients to go for, we know how to measure the impact of the drug, and we don't need huge studies. Now, imagine if we could do that in common chronic diseases, right? So but I think the biggest shift here is actually the right patients.
Yes.
The right targets and everything else obviously is important. But right now, we go into these big common diseases like lupus or Alzheimer's or whatever else. And you're still, I think, dealing with a lot of biological heterogeneity. And some in your trials, you'll have a mix of patients that actually do benefit a lot from your drug, a minority that actually don't benefit at all. And then in the middle, you have people who sort of do and sort of don't. And so you need huge trials. You have a lot of noise. Your statistics go all over the place, and you end up failing mostly, I think, because of that.
Yeah, I see. And do you think there's an element of the sort of greater effectiveness of rare disease trials perhaps being partly because you can't think traditionally in rare disease trials because you don't have the same type of patient population? And so...
Correct.
Yeah,
I think that's true, and I think that the regulators also are more flexible in allowing different ways to approach the problem.
Yes,
right? But again, I think it is because there's a common understanding of the need to do things differently. Now, I think that understanding is shifting as well. Even for common chronic diseases, there's a shift in the understanding that clearly what we're doing now is not sustainable. It's just you can't keep failing the way we are failing and spending the money that we're spending at the time and all of that. So we need to have much more targeted approaches.
Yeah.
I am convinced that AI could be one of the solutions for that, because it could guide us to choose which patients really do benefit and don't, based on actual real understanding of the rules of biological and clinical heterogeneity in patients.
Yes, of course. In coming back to Xaira, and I appreciate there will be things you can say and things you can't say. There's clearly something unique about the proposition, the approach, the underlying technology. I think, there's people with an outstanding track record in drug development, like yourself and others who've joined the company, who've been attracted by something that's being done. The company launched with, I think, was it $1 billion of committed capital? Is that the
That's
sort of...
correct. Yeah.
So, there's a lot of AI companies out there and a good number of them looking at similar problems. There's clearly something different about what you guys are doing or the way you're looking at it. What is the difference, do you think? What have Xaira got that is enabling all of this to happen?
As you say, there's a lot of companies right now embracing AI, which is good to see, right?
Yeah.
But as we've spoken, I think there's a lot of ways in which AI can impact drug development. So there's a number of companies, for example, embracing AI for efficiency, if you want, like looking at AI tools to automate processes, decentralize clinical trials, do different ways of data exploration. That's great. It's great to see that. There's not a lot of companies looking at AI as an engine for innovation, right? So to discover biology, there's a number. There's actually a good number. It's great that there's a good number of them. What I think is unique about Xaira, and that's the reason why we've attracted the people we've had and the capital. I think it is, on one hand, the broadness of the vision. Right? We are really trying to tackle the grand challenges of biology and drug development. Right? How do you understand cellular biology at a fundamental level? How do you design drugs from the beginning that actually do the things you want them to? And you don't have to go through this screening optimization process for years until you get what you want. And then how do you find the right patients? Right? If you put these things together, and if they work, and we hope they will work, you have an incredible engine for innovation, right? And I think that attracts a lot of people like me who've been in the trenches, if you want, for a long time and have learned from experience what works and what doesn't. And you see, this is a new approach. This is the type of thing that may actually work. Yes. Right. And then the funding, I think, just represents the confidence in the project and the vision. Yeah. And I think it also is a realistic ascertainment of the effort it will take, because we should not underestimate that as well. And that's a bit where I think sometimes the hype is damaging us. We need to manage expectations, and unfortunately, there's been a lot of talk about, the AI revolution is going to be tomorrow. Hey, no, it's going to be like DeepSeek in China. All of a sudden, it appears and it works. Biology is a lot more complex than that.
Yes.
Right. And human medicine is a lot more, and it's much more regulated as well, and thankfully so. So it won't be overnight. We need to manage the expectations. This will take a bit of time, and it will take effort and capital, right? So I think our backers recognize that, and they say, yeah, you have a big, ambitious, bold vision. Fantastic. It's going to take you a while to get there, and you'll need cash, and this is the type of thing we want to invest in. Yeah.
It makes sense, and I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because as we develop more and more tools that enable us to do more and more things, perhaps the biggest differentiator is going to be the level of boldness that people are, or the scope of vision that people apply to that, right? And it's kind of counter to the traditional wisdom of how you start a company. The tradition that you focus on something very specific and you expand from there. And I'm sure there's elements of that in your strategy, and there's proof of concept things that you'll do, and all that kind of things, all those kinds of things. But there is something to be said for going for the big swing and going, actually, this is a broader problem than just this part. So let's address the whole thing in stages and in the right way. Then it's about convincing people to have the confidence in your ability to execute on that, of course. But we're coming to a point, I think, going back to this sort of expansion of cognitive capacity, not just in biotech, but we're coming to a point where actually the limit is our imagination and our vision and our courage to pursue these things to some extent.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if we look at the tech revolution that happened in the last 2 decades, right? I think when the tech industry took a quantum leap to the next level, it took that type of an approach, that the current system is has its limitations. So if we want to ascend to the next level, we cannot be constrained by the limitations in the system. We have to build something new. And that means a lot of money and time and investment and a lot of failure, right? That's what's going to happen, right? So the internet came about, and like in the early 2000s, you can recall, I'm sure, lots of companies that had web browsers and had all these things. And out of those, now you have Google, and you have you have Meta and Alphabet and a few other smaller players, but all of those disappeared a bit. And I think in any revolution, that's what's needed. You need to be able to reinvent the game, the rules of the game. To do that, you have to have that boldness of vision and the risk tolerance, and the capital, because it won't change by small increments. If it changes, it has to change because something really fundamental has shifted. Now, of course, the scale of the challenge here is different because, again, like human biology is still the big frontier, right? It's still, out of the sciences, probably the one that we understand the least. And then medicine, because of its intersection with humans and humanity and what we're interested in and how society evolves and culture evolves and all that, is another big squishy thing that you have to adapt to. But again, this is what we're interested in, right? This is essentially how, if you think what type of changes society needs, and we need as a species, if you want, we are still, of course, we've made tremendous progress, but we are still dying from common chronic diseases.
Right.
And I'm not even going like the inequality that exists around the world, but even in highly developed countries, people still die from cardiovascular mortality, from immunological diseases, from Alzheimer's, from cancer. It's not like the problem is solved.
No.
It's far from solved. We have very, very few cures. We have very, very few areas of medicine where we can actually say, we're kind of done here.
Yes.
Right? As societies evolve and we become more affluent, our expectations for what a life should look like is also different, right? We have a much, much lower tolerance, and thankfully so, for that, for like early death or chronic suffering or, dementia. It's good to see that we're still willing to tackle those problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating time, and I think clearly you're working at the forefront of it, and it's very exciting to see what happens. There's going to be lots of challenges, lots of missteps,
sure,
plenty of failure on the way to success, I'm sure. But
yeah, that's the way.
Yeah. But look, we are right in your corner, Paulo, for you and the team, and we wish you the best of luck with it. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been fascinating.
Thanks, Tom. It was a pleasure sharing some insights with you. And thank you for your well wishes. We're going to need all of them.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs, and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium, or TikTok. See you next time.